Hey everyone, welcome to Crime Family. This case is about little Cooper Harris, who's a 22-month-old baby boy who tragically lost his life in a truly horrific manner. Although his death was ruled a homicide, dozens of children die in the same manner every year. I'm going to dig into what makes this case stand out from the other cases where children die in similar circumstances but are not considered murder and are deemed tragic accidents. Thanks for joining us. So this is a pretty unique case, and it still has people on both sides convinced that they're right. Some are fighting for Ross and some are fighting against him. As I was researching, I was going back and forth the whole time of what side I was actually on. But just to be clear, I'm not saying that anyone is innocent in this case at all. I'm just kind of trying to represent both sides here. So this case takes place in Billings, Georgia. It has about 10,000 residents, and it's located in Cobb County, Georgia. This case involves the Harris family, and it takes place on June 18th in 2014. So it involves Leanna Harris, who at the time was a 30-year-old dietitian, and her husband, Justin Ross Harris, who goes by Ross, and he was a 33-year-old web developer, and their adorable 22-month-old baby boy, Cooper. So on the morning of June 18th, 2014, it was a busy but pretty normal morning in the Harris household. Leanna was running late, and she quickly got ready for work and kissed Cooper goodbye and left. Ross was the one who usually took Cooper to daycare before he went to his job at Home Depot, and Leanna usually was the one who picked Cooper up from daycare after her shift. This morning started out as most others did for them, and this is how the day plays out. There is video footage of Ross with Cooper getting some breakfast at Chick-fil-A, and everything seems normal. They order their food and then they go. And I'm not sure if there's actual footage of this, but we do know that there's this big intersection close to the Chick-fil-A that Ross usually would turn left on to take Cooper to daycare. But on this day, he goes straight towards where he worked instead of turning left. And there's video surveillance of him parking in the parking lot, and it shows Ross pull into a parking spot. He spends about 30 seconds in his car, and then he walks into his work and swipes in. And then there's further video of him leaving about 7 hours later at 4:16 p.m. He gets into his car and he drives away. So it feels like a pretty normal day for him so far. But then there's, of course, this one huge incident that happens that turns their life around. Here's the 911 tape.
Emergency. There's a baby on the ground. What's the address? I'm calling 911. We're at Cinco's in Cumberland, near Cumberland. It looks like the baby is having a seizure. Okay, what's that location, ma'am? We're at the Cinco's at Acres Mill Square. Acres Mill Square? You said it's the Citgo gas station? No, it's the Cinco's and Matteo's. It's an intersection of Acres Mill and Park. Is it Tug area? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Was left in the car. Do you see anybody around them? Yeah, his dad, and it was like somebody was going to give him us. Can you see the baby from where you are? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yes, ma'am. How old does the baby appear to be? He looks like he's about 1.5 years old. All right. And can you see him breathing? I'm not sure. They're doing CPR. Who is doing CPR? One of the parents? Looks like a good Samaritan and a good Samaritan. Okay, believe we do have people on the line, okay? But I want to get as much information, okay, from you. So we don't know if the baby's breathing, correct? I'm sorry? We don't know if the baby's breathing. It's under the like it. All right, I do hear the officer, okay? He's requested our ambulance to get started, okay? We have them on the way. Thank you.
Okay, so on that 911 tape, that's not Ross, and it's just a passerby that I think had stopped when she was flagged down when Ross pulled over into the mall parking lot and he was frantic. Meanwhile, at the same time, Leanna is going to Cooper's daycare to pick him up after her shift. But she's told that Cooper wasn't there. So at first she thinks that it was a joke, but then panic sets in and she calls her neighbor thinking that maybe Ross forgot Cooper at home. So she asks the neighbor to go over there and check. But of course they find out that Cooper's not there. So she further thinks that maybe he was kidnapped from daycare, but quickly finds out that he had never actually been dropped off at all. And she actually says out loud at the daycare, she says, Ross must have left him in the car. And the daycare workers are consoling her, offering up explanations, saying there's a million reasons for why he didn't get dropped off. But she's like, no, he must have left him in the car. And there's an interview with 2020 where she said that that's all her mind could comprehend at the time. She called Ross and there was no answer. She goes to his office. He's not there. But then she sees a bunch of people like crowded around the TV watching the news. And a daycare worker that had come with her that left the daycare finds out and tells her that her husband's SUV was on the news and that a child had died. So sadly, what has happened is that Cooper had been left in Ross's SUV all day in the hot sun, and he dies of hypothermia or overheating. That day, the temperature had reached more than 30 degrees Celsius, which is in the high 80s Fahrenheit, and inside the car, it reached almost 50 degrees Celsius. So while all this is going on, there's police footage of Ross at the scene, and the police say that someone else is doing CPR on Cooper when they show up, and Ross is walking back and forth talking on the phone to somebody. He gets angry and he's swearing at the police when they ask him for his ID, and they end up handcuffing him and putting him in the back of their car to calm down. And while he's in there, he's complaining that the handcuffs are too tight and they're hurting him, and he also makes a comment that he's not getting enough air and that it's too hot back there in the car. So the whole time he's in the police car, he's being filmed by like an in-car surveillance system. And there's footage and audio of his behavior. And he does sound very distraught. But of course, this is like a classic example of people saying that he was way too dramatic and he's putting on a show about how upset he was. The police go on to describe that he was weeping one minute, and then in the video it appears that he just stops and is looking around, kind of maybe to look if anybody's watching, and they just kind of sum it up and say that it was just looked like a really bad performance. So I'm going to play some audio of him in the car, just so you can kind of get a sense of that. So far, kind of thinking like what makes police so suspicious in this case, because sadly, it's not actually an unheard of event. It's actually called forgotten baby syndrome, when a parent or guardian leaves their child in a hot car, and it happens to dozens of children every year, with an average in the US around 37 deaths a year from children being left in hot cars and dying. According to a news report from Fox 5 Atlanta, they had information from the director of an organization called Kids in Cars. Her name was Amber Rollins. She said at least 600 kids have died in hot cars in the US since the year 2000. And it's not uncommon in these cases for parents to kind of get back in their car and drive over a mile or drive to the daycare to pick up their kid, not realizing that their kid has died in the back seat. But the unique thing is that not one of them have been convicted of murder. This is the first one in US history. And so, kind of further to this point, Dateline NBC did an episode about this case, and it's called Unimaginable. And it interviews Dr. David Diamond, who has been studying forgotten baby syndrome for over a decade. And he says there's been cases where parents drive for only like 1 block, and it takes only 30 seconds, and they forgot that their child's in the back seat. And he said that these kinds of cases, like the brain actually makes like a false memory. And when the parent thinks about their kid, they have this fake memory that their kid is at daycare, that they actually drop them off. So there's no red flags that immediately pop up for them throughout the day. So, of course, I think the police have to be suspicious of everyone, regardless of the situation when someone has died. So they're looking at Ross in this light. And it was because of Ross that Cooper died, whether it was a complete accident or if it was something more sinister. So going into this case, it's really easy to sympathize with the parents at first. We've heard stories in the past where it really is a tragic accident and the parents really are devastated for real. And this typically happens when there's like a change in routine, or the parent that leaves the baby in the car is not the one who usually drops it off, or they've skewed from their routine in some way. And so, like, I know for me personally, sometimes I have those autopilot days where I like get all the way to work and don't even remember like driving on the highway. It's kind of scary, but I mean, it does happen. So would you guys have like any input so far as to, where this case is going?
Yeah, I really don't know. I don't know really anything about this case, so I have no idea where it's going. So I'm interested to hear. But yeah, I did actually like see other cases where it was similar, of like they forgot their child in the car on a hot day and stuff. So, and all of those, like you were saying, was deemed accidents and stuff. So I'm intrigued to know how this one is different.
Yeah, like I'm with AJ. Like I've heard like so many stories about kids just getting left in cars. Like I'm wondering why this one is different and why the result was so different. So I'm curious to find out the details.
It is really interesting about why this case kind of stands out to police. Police are erring on the side of caution, as is their job. And like I said, they are picking up on a lot of odd behavior that's happening so far on Ross's part. They say he's a bad actor. And one thing to note as well is that Ross used to be a 911 police dispatcher, so he would definitely kind of have some insight on how people actually do act in these kinds of situations. And he probably has some experience with people like acting really panicked. And he knows what would maybe be seen as suspicious. But on the other hand, maybe he was, trained to stay calm in these situations while working as a dispatcher. And maybe he was just the kind of person who naturally wouldn't show that kind of emotion. I don't know. And like, I'm just trying to like understand why it seems like he's such a bad actor and he's faking this. And maybe it's kind of a stretch, but maybe he knows that it looks better for him if he is really distraught, so he is trying to act like that. But maybe if it is an accident, maybe he is actually distraught. He wouldn't act like that normally, and he is putting on a show just so that his actions do match how he's actually feeling. But I mean, if you're like in shock and you're actually devastated, why would those thoughts go through your head to put on this show? So I mean, it doesn't really look good for him either way. Either way, the police are seeing his behavior as suspicious, and when he goes into the station for questioning, they note that he's still acting really overdramatic, and that he's like weeping 1 minute, and then he's able to stop and just talk normally to them. And I'm not saying he is or isn't acting in this case at this point, but of course it always seems to me that whatever you do, you're always doing the wrong thing. We talked about this before, so I'm not really going to get into it, but I don't think he could win either way. There's footage and audio of Leanna seeing him for the first time in the interrogation room, and they're alone, and she's also like super calm and comforting him the entire time. Like, she never lashes out or gets angry with him at all. Like, I'm just gonna play this audio for you so you can have a listen.
I know. But we're going to make sure that she'll do you. You can tell me.
That's just... We went to breakfast, me and them, like we do.
Where are your shoes?
I took them from me. We went to breakfast like we do. Like we normally do. And like that, I turned out at Chick-fil-A. And I just went to work. Like it was nothing, he wasn't making a sound. You know, I think he fell asleep. I was going to the movie. I just thought I'd go and change things, and I looked to my right, and I saw him in the corner of my eye in the backseat. I knew right then. He looked so peaceful. He wasn't like crazy looking. He looked. So I got out of the car. I got out of the car and I grabbed him and I pulled him out. And I tried to do CPR on him. And I knew he was coming. I was lost. And I don't know what lifetime before everybody got there. And I'll say my life is over.
It's not over, baby. It's not over. No, it's not. It's not over. It's not over. Listen. Oh, no. They don't hate you.
Have you talked to him?
They know.
Does my brother know?
He knows they're coming.
They're going to charge me with cruelty, child cruelty. That's why they put me back there in a cell. I took my shoes and took my belt. And I told them, I was like, it's not like I did this on purpose. I said, I got 1,000,000 people that know that I love that boy in my life.
What does that mean? Why do they have to charge you?
Because of my actions resulted in his death.
What does that mean?
I don't know. But he said they're gonna charge me with child cruelty. And I told him, I was like, it's not like
Do we need to get you a lawyer?
yeah. I said, it's not like I went to the grocery store. I said, oh, he's gonna be fine. I'm just gonna go in for 30 minutes.
Did you say too much?
All I did was told him the events of the day. And then they asked, when he said I wouldn't be charged, I told him, I said, I'd like representation. I said, I'm going to be charged. I'd rather not talk anymore. I just want to die right now.
No. No. Do you know what that would do? Do you know what that would do to me if you died right now?
He's still living.
I love you. Look at me.
I'm not taking blood right now.
You don't feel safe.
Like, I don't feel like I should just... I just don't trust myself right now.
I know, honey.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I love you so much. I love you so much.
I know you do. I've never doubted that, honey. Never.
I'm sorry to let them charge me like I did it on purpose.
I know, honey. I told them you didn't do it on purpose. I told them exactly what happened.
What'd you tell them?
Because we found out was me.
When I told them, I said, you probably fell asleep in the car seat.
So what do you guys think about that audio?
I thought her behavior was a little odd. She didn't seem too upset or too angry. She was more trying to like calm him down, and she was saying like, it's okay, like I believe you. Like she didn't really seem that upset, in my opinion.
Yeah. I agree with Steph. She didn't seem. I don't know. It's hard because, like you said, we kind of talked about how whatever you do, it's going to be seen as not the right thing or suspicious. So I don't know. I thought it was kind of suspect when I watched it, but again, I don't know how you're really supposed to act in that situation if everything's an accident. Or, I don't know. I've never been in that situation, so I can't say. But I mean, I could see where they could see it was suspicious because I thought that as well.
Yeah, she does seem super calm, and I just feel like if that was me in that situation, I'd be like yelling, like, you know, like, how could you do this? Like, why? And I don't know, but she just seems to be super supportive of him the whole time. So I don't know, it could be suspicious, but maybe that's just who she is. So Ross is actually charged with Cooper's murder that night, just hours after Cooper dies, and all in all, he has 8 charges laid against him, including malice murder, felony murder, cruelty to children, and criminal attempt to commit a felony and dissemination of harmful material to minors. Do you guys know what the difference is between malice and felony murder?
No, I do not.
No, I do not.
Okay, so I didn't know either, but I looked it up. And so malice murder is the criminal offense in the U.S. state of Georgia committed when a homicide is done with express or implied malice or intent, so meaning that Ross actually meant to lock Cooper in the car and kill him. And felony murder is when someone is killed either intentionally or unintentionally during the act of someone else committing a felony. So in this case, it would be Ross is committing a felony, which is cruelty to children, and Cooper dies as a result of that felony. So he's charged with both.
It's interesting, like, being charged with both. Like, wouldn't it be one or the other? Like, it seems like they're kind of like, I don't know.
I know, it's like charged with like 2 counts of murder for 1 murder, but yeah, I guess because it applies to both situations. So it's like a way to make sure that he gets convicted for sure.
Are the sentencings different? Or
I think for max, it's probably like max for both would just be like life without parole.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so police kept most of the info that they had completely private, so at the trial, no one really knew what was going to be revealed. So still up until this point, all we really know is that it sounds like it could be an accident, and the parents are maybe just acting a little bit suspicious, but I mean, that's nothing to convict anybody for. But once you get further into it, it seems much more than just negligence. The situation is kind of unique because like everything in this case is circumstantial because there's not really any actual hard evidence. So some of the evidence that they spell out in court is that the car seat was very close to the driver's seat, and it was very difficult not to notice. It was about 6 inches from the driver's seat. And so Ross drove an SUV, but it was a compact SUV, and it was discussed that there was like no backup camera in the car, so he would have to physically look around and look behind him when backing up. And they say that it's also almost impossible for him to not have noticed that the seat was there when he was parking and looking around while driving. And also lead detective Phil Stoddart testifies in the trial that Cooper's head would have been sticking out above the car seat while he was sitting in it. So it's not like Ross would have just like seen the car seat but not have seen Cooper. They did a reenactment with a mannequin that was actually a little bit shorter than Cooper, and the mannequin's head was clearly visible above the car seat. So Cooper's head would only have been a few inches from Ross's elbow, and it just would have been so unlikely for him not to just see his son's little head sitting there. Also in that audio that I just played, you can hear Ross saying to Leanna that when he was driving to the movies after work, he just saw Cooper out of the corner of his eye when he was looking to his right to change lanes. And that's when he saw him, and he said he just looked so peaceful, and he just knew as soon as he saw him that, what he had done. So he saw him then, but why wouldn't he have seen him any other time before that? Also, some experts say that there would have been like a really noticeable smell in the car from Cooper's body, and investigators actually say that they could smell it on the scene. But on the other hand, some experts say that no, there wouldn't have been a really strong smell that quickly or in that situation. And then it further comes out in a report that Ross's sense of smell is questioned. Like they're saying he didn't have a strong sense of smell, so even if it was there, he wouldn't have been able to smell it. So I don't know about that. But so Ross claims that Cooper must have fallen asleep after that Chick-fil-A stop, but it's reported that his drive to work was only like 5 minutes. It was only a 5-minute drive from work from the Chick-fil-A. And even if Cooper did fall asleep in that short amount of time, it seems like such a small amount of time for Ross's head to have gone somewhere else. so much so that he forgets about him. And his work is only like a 2 or 5 minute drive away, but that intersection where he had to turn left was even closer to the Chick-fil-A, so it was like a shorter amount of time for his head to have gone completely elsewhere. So it just seems kind of crazy that he was forgotten in that amount of time. Even though I did say earlier that expert was talking about how it only takes like 30 seconds and parents can completely forget about their kid in the car. The police were interviewing the employees at Chick-fil-A, and they said that Ross stood out because he was introducing Cooper to all the employees, and they thought that was super weird. I think that's a really like weak piece of evidence, because I don't think that's, really damning at all. Maybe he's just super happy that day talking to all the employees. I don't know. So another thing comes out is that Ross actually didn't tell police when he was recounting his day to them during his initial interrogation. On that same day, he goes out to lunch with some of his colleagues or friends, and they drop him off in the parking lot, and he goes back to his car around 12:42, so right around lunchtime, to drop off a bag of light bulbs that he had bought. He puts the bag in the car, but he actually doesn't look inside the car. He just opens the door, and he almost deliberately keeps his focus outside of the car, and he puts the bag inside and shuts the door. And there's video surveillance of all of this. It's also noted that there is someone else in the parking lot that starts to walk towards his car as Ross is walking away. And Ross is kind of like watching over his shoulder to see if the guy is getting close enough to see inside the SUV. Of course, this man doesn't notice anything, and nothing comes from this. So some of the more like damning circumstantial evidence in this case comes out when the police seize Ross's computer. And during one of the search warrants, they find in his search history on his computer, it reveals that he had watched a video just 5 days before Cooper's death about children dying in hot cars, and they say he had also searched how long it takes for that to happen. He stated, and so did his wife Leanna, that was one of his biggest fears, was to leave Cooper in the car, and they talked about it frequently. So this definitely raises red flags to me right away, because I feel like if that was something that you were extra worried about, then wouldn't you be like extra vigilant about this? If you thought about it all the time, make sure you do a double take every time you leave the car. So it doesn't make sense that he would completely forget about it if he was constantly thinking about this anyway. It's also reported that Ross had searched how to survive in prison, and there was evidence that he had deleted a bunch of other sketchy search history on his computer with various other information. And they claim that he searched and visited sites and posts related to child-free life and one site called brat-free life. And there's other like really demeaning things about kids, specifically about kids being left in cars in sites that he had searched, but I'm not even going to get into. So that doesn't look good at all for Ross. So Leanna, the mother, is also brought into the line of fire as well. And one of the things that is brought up in court is why she came to that conclusion so quickly, that Ross had left Cooper in the car. Like that, for most people, that would not be their first thought, I wouldn't think. So why was this her first instinct? And she goes back to that, saying that it's because they were actually really worried that this was going to happen. She said Ross was actually really naturally forgetful, so they thought that this was definitely a possibility that could happen someday. But then still, like, why wouldn't you make sure to, like, he would check and make sure that she was, like, reminding him and stuff like that if you were actually super worried about this? And of course the cops thought that she wasn't acting in an appropriate manner as well. Police noticed that she was super emotionless when they told her that Cooper had died, and when they did tell her, all she said was, "Where's my husband?" And then when she's brought into the interview room with that audio that I played earlier, she's comforting Ross and she asks him, "Did you say too much?" So people really focus on her saying this, and there's clips where they isolate this audio, and it really does seem like a guilty, worried person asking another guilty person. Like, what did you say? Did you say too much? But when you watch it all in that video where she just says it in conversation, it really doesn't stand out as much as it does on its own. And it kind of just flows into the conversation. And she talks about this in an interview with 2020 later, that Ross was the kind of person that would just kind of talk and talk and talk if you let him. And she felt that he was kind of spinning a story that maybe really looked bad for him when it shouldn't have. But it was just the way that he couldn't stop himself from kind of explaining or over-explaining situations. People do paint Leanna as a bad guy in all of this as well for defending her husband and standing up for him. She was apparently emotionless at the funeral, And she even says that her reaction is not how she would have even thought she would have reacted in a situation like this. So she kind of even surprised herself with how she was acting. She said it just felt like a dream and it wasn't real. So I guess that kind of makes sense. She's just like in this whole other like kind of state of shock where she can't even accept the fact that it's real. She really didn't think that Ross would have done this on purpose. And she even testifies in trial for his defense. And she was on his side the entire time. And she said they had no time to really talk or grieve together in private at all because Ross was taken into custody that day and he was never released. So going back to the funeral that I was talking about, Leanna has her cell phone out and Ross is able to call in from jail and she puts it on speakerphone and he speaks at the funeral. He's apparently really emotional the whole time. And there wasn't any cameras allowed in the church, but a reporter that was there later discusses that when Leanna was speaking at the funeral, it was as if she was kind of catering to a press conference and saying things that she thought would help her rather than focusing on her little boy's death. She even said that if she had the chance to bring him back, she wouldn't because bringing him back into a broken world would be selfish. So of course that like super stands out to me as being super odd, like an odd thing to say, especially at a funeral in front of everybody. But maybe she was just super distraught and angry at the world that all this was happening. And that's just kind of how she felt, like just mad and sad about everything. I don't know. It's really weird how people act in these kinds of situations. She also said that she will miss her son forever, but now he won't have to deal with heartbreak, won't have to deal with awkward stages, or deal with middle or high school. I don't know how that's worse than what happened to him. Like, it just doesn't make any sense that these are the kinds of things that she's thinking about. Like, oh, at least he won't have to deal with high school. Like, what? So some people saw this as evidence of a motive, that maybe she really didn't want to have a child. And it makes me think that maybe because she grew up with a single mother and she was really introverted growing up, maybe she dealt with like really serious inner demons herself growing up. Maybe she didn't fit in. Maybe she was bullied. And she just was feeling all those emotions and didn't want her son to have to go through that. And she was just kind of relieved that he wasn't going to have to go through those kinds of things. But I mean, even still, like, I don't know how that's worse than the way that he died. So I'm going to go into even more detail here about further evidence that came out as well. This stuff is like, I guess it is really damning against Ross. And maybe she knew more about the stuff that I'm going into than she says she did, and maybe she's just kind of hurt by everything and just felt that the world really was an awful place and just sick of everything, didn't want her son to have to grow up in this kind of world. Do you guys have any thoughts so far before I go further into this?
Yeah, like I think, oh no, when you were talking about the internet searches that he made, like to me that's very not a good look, obviously. I think if you just look at those, then it's very suspicious, and I don't know how they can really make a defense. If you're looking up like how to survive in prison, or how long it takes for someone to die in a car, like, and then the child happens to die in a car like shortly after that, like, I feel like is that circumstantial evidence or is that like hard evidence? Because I feel like that's pretty bad.
I like that's circumstantial, right? Because it's not like, you know, maybe he happened to look that stuff up and then his son happened to die in the same way. Like, it could be a coincidence. So I think it is circumstantial.
Although I guess too, like you said, that was one of his biggest fears and he was always thinking about that. So maybe like he did search that, just like, I don't know, just if he was constantly stressed about it and that just was something he wanted to search just so that he would know, but it obviously doesn't look good.
Yeah, like if he was so concerned that he was gonna leave his child in the car, like what, like then why did he forget the child was in the car that day? Like if he was so concerned about that, like I don't know. To me, like I don't think. I mean, everybody has bad days. Everybody has like rush days, like they're rushing out of the house and like you forget things. But I don't think I'd ever forget my child in the car. Like I just don't think it would happen. I don't know how he could not know that he was there.
But like like I said, there are other cases I'm familiar with where something like that did happen. Like I feel like I watched an episode of Oprah or something, like where this woman had left her car or her child in the car for like a whole day, and the child died. So I feel like that is something that happens. So I mean, you think, yeah, like how could that actually be something that would happen? But I mean, it has happened where it's been accidents before, so like it is plausible. But I think when you put it together with all this other sketchy stuff, it looks like it wasn't really an accident.
Yeah, so every other case in the States has been deemed an accident, and there's been like I said, over 600 of these cases since 2000. So it does happen. it happens to loving parents that, would never ever dream of hurting their kids in any way. Yeah, and it is really unfortunate. But in this case, like Ross, though, he like wasn't in a hurry. It's not like he was like speeding to get to work, right? Because he stopped at Chick-fil-A to get breakfast. So he had a little bit of time to spare before he had to get to work. So he couldn't have been thinking about that. So, and then it was only like 2 minutes and he'd forgotten about his son already, allegedly. So I'm just going to go into a little bit of background right now about Ross and Leanna, just to show that nothing in their background growing up like remotely stands out as unusual in any way. Leanna, like I said, had grown up with a single mom, and she was very introverted and was described as a goody-goody in high school. And she had aspirations to be a nurse and eventually went to school for and became a dietitian. But her biggest goal in life was to become a mother. That was what she wanted most of all. Ross was born in 1980, and he had a good upbringing, and people that knew him as a teenager said that he was a really good kid and that they were happy that he was friends with their kids. So he wasn't a bad influence. He wasn't a troubled kid in any way or any obvious sense. He had a job at the University of Alabama. He was a mail carrier at one point, and he was also a police dispatcher, like I had mentioned before, for almost 3 years. And eventually he went to university. He graduated with a business administration degree, majoring in management information systems. And he was also active in his church, and he played the guitar in the church band. So Ross and Leanna got married pretty quickly into the relationship. Yeah, Leanna was only 20 when she met Ross, and he was 23. And within a year, they were already talking about marriage. And there's actually reports that they had struggled to conceive. So when they actually did get pregnant with Cooper, they were super happy and super grateful to finally have a son. So there's nothing in their background that would, that we had cases before where they had a really troubling upbringing, and this is, something that would break them, or they had mental issues. Nothing like that in this family at all. So there's nothing to stand on in that sense. Okay, so what eventually does come out is some evidence that the defense really didn't want to be admissible in court. They made the argument that it was irrelevant to his role as a good father and it would prejudice the jury, but it did come out in court and it was used against him. What is revealed is that Ross he actually had a sex addiction, as they said, and it came out that he was texting and sexting like 6 women alone on that day, and one was underage, and he was having multiple affairs, and he was even paying for prostitutes. And so this was one reason why he was preoccupied that day, and the prosecution kind of used that as, of course they used it against him as saying he had his double life. If he could lie about all this stuff, cheat on his wife constantly, then why couldn't he be lying about this situation right now? They said it was a motive for him, that he wanted a child-free life and he wanted to get rid of his kid so that he could kind of more focus on these extramarital affairs that he was having. And the defense, they said it really had nothing to do with his life as a father, and they said it was more a distraction and a reason why he may have forgotten Cooper, because he was thinking about these things, but it didn't mean that he was a bad father. Just because he was a shitty husband doesn't mean he's a bad father. Which is a good point. I mean, one thing does not mean the other, right? So yeah, like I said, the defense didn't want this to come out. And they argued that it wasn't relevant to the case. But the police did say that it could be used as a motive, saying that he was unhappy in his marriage, in his life as a father, and that this was his way out. That it was proof of a double life, and he had the ability to be very deceptive, as his wife apparently had no idea this was going on. And it did come out, though, that she was aware in the past that he kind of had a problem with pornography and that he had been unfaithful before, but she had thought that they had worked through it. And when he was going through all this, she even said straight up to him, like, do you want a divorce? Because if you want to keep doing this, and we can just get a divorce. And he said that's the last thing he wanted. And this was years before this had happened. So she kind of thought that as like, it wasn't his excuse to get out, because he actually didn't want out. He just had a problem. One of his friends that used to defend him spoke out on the Dr. Drew show, and they mentioned that they used to defend him until they found out about his sex addiction. And that's when they turned on him, because they thought he was a good church-going guy, but I guess that wasn't true. I feel like if it really was an addiction, though, like whether you go to church or not really has no bearing on that. So, I mean, that's not really a good excuse at all. The Dr. Drew show also points out that a police officer with over 30 years on the force said that this case shocks his conscience. I mean, whether it's an accident or not, it's super horrific, like the way he died, and the medical examiner testifies that Cooper likely would have gone through various stages before he died. Like, he would have been in pain, he would have had a headache, he felt nauseous, he probably had multiple seizures, and as he was getting more and more uncomfortable and anxious and scared, he may have been scratching and pulling at his face, and they actually did find like scratch marks down his face. He had obvious signs of dehydration, his lips were completely purple. And one witness on the scene when Cooper was getting pulled out of the car was that Cooper was completely soaked. Like, he looked like he had literally just come out of a pool. He was so soaked in sweat. So it really is awful to think that, especially if this was done on purpose. And I think this is where a lot of people, that emotional part comes in. Like, if this was purposeful, then it's like one of the most horrific ways to like kill somebody. It's slow, it's scary for the kid, and it's just awful. Yeah, while all this is coming out, Leanna said she had no idea that Ross was calling prostitutes. This was the first time that she was finding out about this while in court, allegedly, but she still defends him. Like, she's still sitting there for the defense, saying that he ruined her life and she would never be able to trust anybody again, but he was still a good father, and she still is adamant even to this day that he did not do that on purpose. She did divorce Ross after all this was over, and even though she didn't want to be with him anymore, obviously, she still says that he's innocent. On the Dr. Drew show, they also touch on the fact that Ross kind of shows signs of narcissistic and sociopathic tendencies, because not only does he only care about his own life, but he cares about his reputation. So leaving his family, and if he really didn't want to be a father, or putting his son up for adoption would look bad on him. And so his way out was to make himself look like a victim as well, and making this look like an accident would serve him, because he would be a victim and he didn't do anything bad. So, he'd be child free and it didn't have anything to do with him. So at this point, what do you guys think? Like, you convinced that it wasn't an accident anymore?
I don't know. Like, there's so much evidence to suggest that he did it on purpose, but there's also evidence to prove that, like, maybe he did forget him there. I don't know. It's really hard for me. Like, I don't know. I'm like on the fence. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really know either. I thought, like, I was kind of waiting for the one thing that you said that would be like, and this came out and he did it, basically, which never really happened. I feel like you said it's kind of all circumstantial. I'm leaning more towards probably that he did do it, just based on the computer searches, and I don't know, the fact that he was having all these affairs. Maybe he just didn't want to have a child and kind of wanted to be more free, I guess. But I don't know. I'm like kind of torn. I don't really know. Like, he probably did it, I would say, if I had to choose, but it's not like 100% certainty or anything.
Like, for me, like, I want to say he did it, but then my heart says, like, how could you do that to a child? Like, so, like, just a slow death like that. I don't know, like, to me, like, it's just so sad. Like, if he did it, then he, like, should rot in jail for what he did. But if he didn't, then, like, I don't know, it's just...
And, like, I was thinking this too, but maybe, like, if it was planned and he did do it, maybe because I was thinking, like, there's so many... If... It's just like a really random way to, like, for him to do it if he really was adamant. And I just think maybe it was a way for him to be sort of hands off, so he didn't have to actually physically do anything like violent. I don't know. It doesn't really matter because it's horrible either way, but I think maybe this could kind of give himself some distance from it, and then also an easier way to be like, it was an accident, because these things do happen. I don't know. Versus like if he had done something like actually physically himself, if he had like strangled him or something,
Yeah, like that's what I was saying. Like, part of me wants to say like he like didn't do it just because how gruesome the child suffered so badly. And then the other part of me is like, well, look what AJ said, like he wanted to have like his hands not on the child, so like that was the only way he could think of killing him without having any like DNA on him or like fingerprints on him, I guess we'd say.
And if he was really smart and he was thinking, like, he probably thought, oh yeah, everyone knows that this is kind of my biggest fear, so if it were to happen this way, then people would sort of believe that it happened, maybe. I don't know. And versus something that just came totally out of left field that no one would have expected or heard about before. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it is like kind of a way for him, if he did do it, a way for him to do it, get rid of his son, and he was like totally hands off, like you said. Like if he had murdered him in like an obvious way that it was murder, but try to make it look like somebody else, like there's too much evidence probably, and he knew that. Or if his son, you know, went missing or was kidnapped, it's like, well, that's a really hard thing to stage if you did that. So this is a kind of a way, like, yeah, he wanted out of that life and he had to get rid of his son because it would look bad if he just left his family. This was a way to do it, and he knew that because he was obsessed with it, because he like Googled it and looked up videos and watched how long it took and stuff like that. So, and I think a lot of people that are still on his side are thinking, like, they're still standing up for him because they can't wrap it around their mind about why somebody would do that kind of thing. Like, it is really I find it like a really horrific way to die. Like, super, you just suffer for hours. Yeah, so at this point, I mean, I was super back and forth, like, this whole time I was researching. I'm like, did he do it? Like, didn't he? There's so many things. But there's more that I'm going to talk about as well. So I'll check in a minute. So the trial was moved out of Cobb County due to the publicity it had gained. And to give him a fair trial, they moved it to Glenn County. And I've just scratched the surface with this case, I feel, because it was reportedly there was 2,700 pieces of evidence against Ross in this case. So I don't know what they all are. I wasn't able to find all of them. Obviously, it would be way too long to talk about all of them. So there is this huge pile of evidence against him, even though we've only talked about it a little bit. On November 14th, 2016, Ross was convicted of murder, among other things, and sentenced to life in prison without parole. There was a petition that was started on change.org for Ross, including signatures from many people that he knew that were defending him, saying that he really was a loving father and there's no way that he could have done this. That petition was removed, though, shortly after it was created. So like I said, he still has a strong... It's mostly like his friends and family that are still on his side about this, because they knew him and said that he would never lay a hand on Cooper. He would hardly even raise his voice to him. And there's videos, like home videos, that Ross was just such a loving father that they can't wrap their head around him doing this. In January of 2017, so this is just a couple months after he was convicted, Ross, of course, he applied for an appeal. And his lawyers argued that the information about his extramarital affairs prejudiced the jury and made it impossible for him to have a fair trial. And a hearing was actually scheduled for December 2020 on Ross's motion for a new trial. And the basis of their argument were things like the cops falsely testified about things like the smell on the scene, as they actually didn't say anything about this until a year later. And other witnesses on the scene said they allegedly said that they didn't smell anything. So it's kind of like, did the cops just kind of make this up or exaggerate it more to make their point? They also said the police made false testimony to obtain search warrants, so they weren't even supposed to be looking on his computer. They made false statements so that they could seize those things. And they said the police were biased, but the defense were not allowed to present the evidence that showed that. And they also say that it's not true that he had searched for how long it takes a child to die in his car. So I'm not sure where that came up or who said that, but that's allegedly not even true, that he had searched for that. They also say that the lead investigator, Phil Stoddart, lied on several occasions, such as his testimony that Ross was involved in a group promoting a child-free lifestyle. He said the child-free group had come up on a Google chat with a coworker that Ross was talking with. And this coworker sent Ross the link to a Reddit subgroup, and then Ross clicked on it, looked at it, and then his response to it was grossness. So yeah, like it wasn't like he was searching for these kinds of groups. Someone actually had sent him a link and he happened just to look at it. And they said that the video that he watched about what it's like to die in a hot car just randomly popped up while he was on Reddit checking out something else, and he happened to click on it. So he actually wasn't searching for that either. It was something that was in his history because he did watch it because it popped up randomly. So that hearing did happen. It was done via Zoom in December due to the pandemic, and you can actually watch the whole thing. It's on YouTube. Yeah. And the decision for a new trial is still pending. They haven't made a decision about that yet. So some of the stuff that is coming out, like, I don't know, it kind of makes me change my mind a little bit, but there's still so much, like 2,700 pieces of evidence against him. I don't know. What do you guys think now?
I don't know. Like I said before, my biggest the big thing that made me most suspicious was all of the internet search history and stuff. But I mean, I guess if he watched a video about that, but like, what are the chances he would just happen to watch a video about that and then have his son die the exact same way? But maybe if that was his biggest fear, then he saw the video and he had to click on it just to like, for his own curiosity. And I don't know, people do weird things that you can't really explain, but yeah, 2,700 pieces of evidence, you can't really refute something like that. That's a lot. So without knowing the exact details of what all of those are, but you know, I feel like you don't have 2,700 pieces of evidence against you if you're totally innocent of something.
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards more that he did it now that after you read that about that, the rest of the evidence. It's just hard for me to believe that somebody will let a child die that way, or let a child die in general. Like, but to have someone die like that, it's just such a horrible way for someone to go. Like, I want him to be not guilty of murder, but I guess things don't always work out.
Yeah, and like for me, someone like the hardest evidence against him was like him searching for those things. But if it comes out that he actually didn't do that, then I mean, there goes that. But he was obsessed with it, I guess. But that if he's obsessed with it, it makes me think like he'd be more vigilant. So I don't know. It's such a coincidence that that's kind of what was on his mind all the time. Yet when it was actually happening, he didn't think about it. And some people still think that Leanna was involved, like she maybe helped him plan. But there's no evidence of that at all. Like, what do you guys think about Leanna? Do you think, even though she was acting kind of weird, like, do you think she's guilty at all?
I think it's hard to say because, like you said, there's no evidence against her. Like, there's nothing there to prove that she had anything to do with it. Like, she did go to the daycare and like go pick him up, like she would normally do on a regular basis. But I mean, that could just been like an alibi. Like, yes, she went to go pick him up and he wasn't there. Like, there's no proof that she had any involvement. So it's hard for me to actually say that she was involved or not.
Yeah, and they have all this evidence against him and 0 against her, so it's unlikely that if she was involved, or it's unlikely that she was involved because they have nothing on her at all.
Yeah, like, how could they, if she was involved, they would have to have something on her other than that, like, oh, she seems very calm in this video with him and stuff. But like I said before, you can't really analyze somebody's behavior when, I don't know. I mean, you can, but like, I feel like it's hard to know exactly what people would do. And to, like we said so many times before, like, no matter what you're doing in those cases, you're wrong. Like, if you're not sad enough, or if you're too sad, like, you can't win. So I don't really think that's anything to kind of, she's calm in that video. Okay. But maybe that's just her. I don't know. Like, sometimes when things happen, like, you can't control how you react or what your emotions do. So I hardly see that as any evidence against her, and I don't think she really had any part in it based on what I've heard.
You could say that, like, the way she spoke at the funeral was that was odd, and like you could say like, oh, like, why would she think,
yeah, that's sketchy.
Like, but I mean, people say crazy shit and weird things all the time, so I don't feel like that's enough evidence to be like, oh yeah, she had something to do with it. But
yeah, like, I need more to go on based on like, oh, she said this really kind of sketchy thing at a funeral. Like, okay, she's grieving and she's in shock, like,
Yeah, and why make that big announcement in front of all these people at a funeral if those are your real feelings? Like, I think it's just like, just unfortunate, like, whatever she was thinking, she was just kind of saying.
Yeah, and I think like, if she really did have a part in it and she was trying to, make sure nobody found out that she did, like, she's not just going to spout that off like randomly and cause suspicion of surrounding her if, she's trying to avoid that. So it makes more sense, or more believable, that she just kind of is sort of on autopilot and just saying, can't really control what she's saying. I don't know.
Yeah, and there was an interview with Dateline with one of Ross's cousins, but actually it was one of Leanna's best friends as well, saying that Leanna was actually just like she was a very composed person. Like, she didn't have outbursts like that. So like, the way she was acting in those videos was super just normal for her. Like, that's just how she was, always really calm. And also, it makes me think that she wasn't involved at all because of how supportive she was of Ross. And like, she didn't, even after all this stuff was coming out, like, she was sitting there in court and they're saying, oh, did you know that he was hiring prostitutes? And she's like, no, this is the first time I've ever heard of this. And saying like he was engaging with like underage girls, and she didn't know that either. But yet she was still saying like he didn't do it. When, from like a lot of people, even if they didn't think he did it, this would be the time for them to get their payback and be like, yeah, he did do it. but she stayed by him the whole time. So I think that definitely shows something.
So maybe he didn't do it then. Like,
I know. Like the more I think about this case, I'm like, maybe he didn't, because if all that stuff, like him searching for stuff, isn't true, and the cops were just
but
kind of.
They
like,
still have 2,700 pieces of evidence.
I know, and I wonder. It's going to be interesting when, if that new trial is granted, what comes out from that, because apparently there was a lot of stuff that the defense wasn't allowed to present in court. So
and also too, just because she's adamant in saying he didn't do it, that doesn't mean he doesn't. Like, if she knew nothing about it and was not involved at all, like, he very well could have done it and she just doesn't know, even if she doesn't believe him to be capable of that. But you hear that all the time. People are like, I never thought they would have done this. They were like the nicest person and they would never hurt anyone.
well,
But,
yeah, and he was
you
like
know.
he was a guitar player at their church, but he was living a double life, like he really was. So he's definitely capable of that, even though nobody thought that about him. So
Yeah, just think of, like, we've done other cases in the past where it's like these really highly religious people. People think, oh, they're part of the church, they would never hurt anyone. But, like, behind the scenes, they're like fucking,
I know.
Like, I feel like no matter what someone, like, how someone reacts or how someone feels, like, whether they're too emotional or not emotional enough, like, if they were both really upset during that interview where she's in the room calming it down, if they were both hysterically crying or hysterically, like, being dramatic, then they would have said something about that too. So it's hard to like I don't know. It's hard to, like, you can't just go off someone's emotions, because, like, everybody's different. So
Yeah, like if she was in that room, like, yelling at him, they would have used that against both of them as well. And she wasn't yelling at him; they used that against her. Like, it doesn't matter. So,
And sometimes I do think, like, sometimes when they get suspicious of someone and they say, oh, they said this really weird thing, it's like, but sometimes I think it's more natural to kind of say things without thinking them if you're innocent, and then you don't really realize how that could look against you later, versus, like, if you had done it, maybe you're going to be more conscious and careful about what you say because you don't want to give out anything that might lead to you. So the fact that, like, people, if they spout out these things that sound bad, it's like, oh, well, maybe they are not realizing. You know what I mean?
yeah, because if you're not guilty and you're not guilty, so you're not thinking that you're going to be charged with anything, then you're just not thinking about what you're saying.
Like, you're not going to be thinking, oh, I shouldn't say that, or I shouldn't say
you're not being
this.
super cautious about it. Yeah.
Like, you just kind of, like I said, you're going based on what your emotions lead you to say.
Yeah.
And then
So
you think later, like, oh, that probably sounded bad.
yeah, so it's almost more suspicious if you're, like, almost super scripted and, like, think about what you say before you say it, because it's like, well, why? Either way, it's gonna be like, why?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I'm interested to see where this goes. Maybe we'll do an update when the actual if a new trial is granted. If not, well, it is what it is. Okay, that does it for this case, everyone. Thanks for joining us. You can find us on Instagram at Crime Family Podcast, on Twitter at Crime Family Pod 1. You can find us on Facebook, Crime Family Podcast. You can send us an email with some suggestions at crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com. And we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks for listening. Peace.
bye.